Tim Tom Talks. I'm Tim in Australia.
And I'm Tom in Los Angeles, California.
Perfect. Today we are going to be talking essentially around the 4 I's. So these terms that we've used for the last few years to define essentially what we think leaders do. And they are imagine, ignite, immerse, and inspire. And we're going to use these essentially as the sort of the stepping stones to go through a discussion around transitioning to the new normal. So in Australia right now, we've got two of our states essentially really about to ease restrictions off and sort of start to say, business is back. The rest of the country is essentially sort of starting to migrate in that direction. And Tom, you can tell us more, but certainly from what we're seeing in the news over here, it sounds like parts of America are sort of just starting now to talk seriously about how they kind of move into whatever lies ahead.
Yes, absolutely. And each state here is determining on their own path what's going to be best and with groups of states. And I think what's interesting is each state is actually imagining what they need to do for each sector that makes sense, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so they're working with each sector, and they actually have, especially in California, they have heads of each sector, like the head of Google and Apple on one end, and Stanford University on the other, working with universities and so on. And the elite of the elite, and what they're doing is saying, hey, what is it going to look like if we stepstone this business? What do we need as a business to restart while keeping our employees safe and our customers safe? What does that look like? Yeah. And each one is asking the question, for my sector, what do I need for my people? What do I need for my teams? What do I need for the individuals? Because each individual is going to have their own idiosyncrasies and family issues and work issues and remote issues or whatever they are. And then for the sector, what does the customer look like? What do they need? How are they going to get our product? How are they going to be limited in getting our product? How can we more efficiently get our product to them? And how do we get our teams to be our brain trust to determine what other questions we should be asking and answering as we move through this unknown? What about you?
Oh, look, I mean, I think the operative word in what you've just said is imagine, which is, of course, very appropriate because that's where we believe everything begins. I think it really comes down to, every leader right now is kind of looking out of their own porthole, right? Like if we use the boat or the ship analogy, everyone's in this together. We're all moving more or less in the same direction, but every leader has got to look out of their own porthole and see the landscape as they see it out that particular window, and then they've essentially got to say, well, that is a very small, here we are, that's how small it is. That's a very small frame of reference. So, whilst I can project out of that small frame of reference, I'll put that back on again, and sort of, essentially imagine and create for myself the story of what's happening out there and how I respond to that. Really the best way to do it, is to sort of, like open the cabin door, have a look down the hallway and say, hey, down there, what do you see? What do you see out of your window? What does the landscape look like through your porthole? And then start to kind of combine and align all of these imaginative processes so that you can compound. And this is something that was spoken about in an interview I did for the Better World Leaders podcast with this guy who's up in Singapore called Paul Dunn. And he talked about this in terms of essentially, sort of tapping into the collective wisdom that what he is interpreting, the best leaders are doing right now is they're sort of moving away from this position of the power of one and this notion of I know, I tell, you do. And they're really sort of, kind of putting themselves in the position a little bit more akin to a really effective chairman of the board, where their role is to listen, to sort of aggregate lots of views, lots of opinions, have everybody contribute something unique and add their own value in interpretation. And then they compound all of those things, mix it up, mash it all up together and then say, okay, based on everything, we're going to make this decision. So their imagination is really based on a composite of a little bit of that, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. So it's all of those porthole views compiled together. And then that puts you in a point of ignition where you can actually decide, how do we move this train forward? So boats, trains, now maybe you can do automobiles.
Well, actually, going back to your boat analogy and the porthole, I think what's really key to point out here, and this is both for your people and your customers and your products, because the new normal is going to be restricted in some way, probably for the next year and a half.
Sure.
Talk to anybody, that's what we know, right? And so if you're looking through a porthole, right, you need to expand that to a much larger view, because your system may have all worked in this very direct linear fashion. And as you move forward, that flexibility, adaptability, resilience needs to be kind of expanded so that you can meet the needs of the consumer and your people.